All right, guys, we're gonna give it 2 more minutes for some final people to roll in here, and then we will get moving. So thank you for your patience. All right. All right, we will get going. I imagine some more people are going to be signing on as we get going, but I don't want to hold up everyone's day. So really quick introduction. So thank you guys for joining on your Wednesday morning. I know everyone's really busy. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Becky Reel. I am founder of Real Home Care Consulting and Coaching. I help agencies from startup to exit strategy, really find your voice, increase revenue, streamline your operations, whatever the needs are of your individual agency. I know some of you that I see, some of you I don't know, so nice to meet you if we have not met. Background, we had a summit a few weeks ago for home care agencies, and Jacob from Paradigm joined us and was the talk of the town, and we ran out of time. People just had far too many questions for Jacob and how the VA works, Medicare Advantage, Medicaid. So we thought it would be a really good idea to hop on another session and continue that conversation. So I'm going to hand this over to Jacob from Paradigm. He will introduce himself and he's going to do a very quick run through of Paradigm and what they do and how they can help. And then we're going to open this up to everybody for really specific Q&A. I want this to be the nitty and the gritty, whatever you're dealing with. I want you to be able to walk away with tangible answers that will help improve your agency. This is being recorded, so I'll also send this out to everybody and for everyone who missed it. So I'm going to pass it on to Jacob. Feel free if you have questions, use the Q&A if you don't feel like speaking up. But go ahead, Jacob, and it's your show.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Becky, and hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your Wednesday morning to be here. Like Becky just mentioned, my name is Jacob, and I am a product and revenue operations manager over at Paradigm. And today, so as Becky just said, we had a summit where I gave a talk about strategically building success through third-party payers. Some of you were there at that summit, and I think most of you were not. So what I want to do is kind of do a quick shortened version of that presentation first, just to kick things off, get you all on the same page, understanding the different payer lines that we're working with, and then some high-level understanding of what it all means for you and your business. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to go ahead and share screen for. All right, are we able to see that?
Yeah.
Looks like we are. All right, perfect. Okay, well, here we go. So there I am. So as I mentioned, I am a product and revenue operations manager over at Paradigm. I have worked with Paradigm for about a year now, and in that time, I have consulted with hundreds of different home care agency owners across the country on how to take advantage of third-party payers like VA and Medicaid, whether they are beginning just getting credentialed, all the way to they have a giant census and are looking to just alleviate some of their back office pains. I've been there kind of across the board for them. Today, we're going to begin by talking about the need for diversification, and we'll get into the diversification with those specific payers. And we are going to do a quick high-level overview of what working with Medicaid is like, what working with VA is like. We're actually not going to touch on Medicare Advantage, so I apologize for leaving that bullet point there. And lastly, we are going to discuss how Paradigm adds value there. So beginning with the need for diversification, just like in your individual investment portfolios, you want to make sure that your business has a wide range of payer sources. So, if you had told me that years ago you only had Bitcoin in your investments, I would have said that's crazy. Now, if that was the case, you would be absolutely rolling in the deep today. But it is still very volatile. So right now we're at 70,000 per Bitcoin, could drop all the way down to zero at the blink of an eye. The same is true for your home care business. So, the tried and true private pay is fantastic until you have market volatility when people are starting to get squeezed a little more. So they're reducing their weekly hours that they're signing up for through your agency. They are turning over a little bit faster as their families are saying, well, why don't you just move in with me? It will make more sense financially, etc. So what we always say is that by having a diverse range of payers, you just mitigate yourself from the risks of working with these different payers as things change and as the market fluctuates. There is the opportunity to make a very good amount of money working with different payers. So for payers like the VA, they often offer really fantastic reimbursement rates for agencies. In certain places, I know in parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota, it goes up to $78, $80 an hour. In most places, it's pretty comparable, maybe a little bit higher than the private pay rates. I know where I'm located in Illinois, it's somewhere around $45 to $48 an hour. So it's pretty competitive. Other payers like Medicaid offer, they might not have the same rates, but they offer just a large volume of hours, and it's much easier to get those clients. So whereas a typical private pay client might be with you for an average of 16 to 20 hours a week, an average Medicaid client is typically with you for somewhere around 40 to 60 hours a week, seeing much higher authorizations, creating a large amount of gross profit for your agency. By working with these different payers, you will simply see an increased referral source for yourself. So not only will you be able to receive referrals for those new payers that you're working with, you will also be able to receive you will also be able to provide a little bit more value to your referral sources. So your local rehabs, your local realtors who specialize in elder downsizing, your local elder law attorneys, etc. Anyone who's a current resource. If you can say, oh yeah, I take Medicaid, VA, Medicare Advantage, workers' comp, that person, it just makes their life so much easier. And so where they might randomly be tasked, with a rehab center, that's their primary function, that case manager, is to get them out of the rehab center and back into their home under a good level of care. You are actively making their job easier by making it so that they don't have to keep tabs on who can take what. You can take everything. So you will see more private pay referrals in addition to those other referrals. In a similar vein, if you do take a referral source and a payer that your competitor does not take, you will get those clients and your competitor will not. So you have a greater competitive advantage. A somewhat lesser talked about benefit of working with third party payers is caregiver retention. So with the private pay market where things are fluctuating and where there is a little bit more turnaround with those clients, it can sometimes be challenging to make sure that your caregivers are constantly staffed with the hours that they need. With the average private pay client having about 20 hours a week and the average caregiver looking to receive about 30 hours a week of hours, there's a bit of a mismatch there, especially if that private pay client decides to stop service. So working with third-party payers where the government is actually the ones paying for those services and the family is not squeezed financially, it allows you to have a much more consistent schedule for your caregivers. And then, especially if you're working with Medicaid, you have many more hours to go around your agency, which then ultimately helps keep them happy. And then lastly, the community impact of working with these third-party payers is enormous. So by accepting VA and working actively with your veteran population, there are tons of veterans who would love to be feel connected in their community, and you get to help make that a reality for them. And then with Medicaid clients, these are oftentimes people who are really struggling financially, and maybe just needs a little bit of help. And so you get to provide them with that assistance. And so not only are these good things for your business and your bottom line, they're also just a great way to feel good about the business that you are running. A little bit more information on why we should look at diversifying payer lines. So in 2022, the most recent Home Care Pulse benchmarking study, it was reported that 64.3% of agencies see the majority of their revenue come from private pay. And then in that same year, those same agencies saw a reduction by 24% in those weekly private pay billable hours. So it looks like those private pay hours are absolutely, we're seeing a decline as people are feeling the stresses of the economy. So the different third-party payers that we typically work with are Medicaid, Veterans Affairs, and Medicare Advantage. And if you have questions about Medicare Advantage, you can feel free to ask today. I'll be happy to answer those. I just wanted to keep this part of the presentation shorter so that there'd be more time for questions. To give you an idea of what working with third-party payers looks like on an agency standpoint as you're looking to grow your agencies, we have this example here. So this one case mix. Let's imagine that your goal is to increase your annualized gross profit by $250,000 a year. So in order to achieve that goal, we need to first understand how much gross profit we are getting per hour for each of our different clients. And then we need to understand a reasonable expectation of how many hours per week we will be seeing, and then how much gross profit per year from those clients we will see. So for Medicaid, let's say that our gross profit is $5 an hour. It's pretty low. Private pay, say it's $10 an hour, and VA, let's say it's $20 an hour. Mileage may vary based on your location. It really just depends on exactly where you are, and which payers you're working with. But so from there, we're going to calculate what that gross profit on an annualized basis looks like for each of those clients. So for Medicaid, where it's $5 an hour, but you're seeing a 40-hour week average client, that client is worth $10,400 a year in gross profit to you as in your agency. For private pay, where it's $10 an hour, but 20 hours per week, that client is actually worth the same amount in gross profit total to your agency. And then lastly, for the VA, where it's $20 an hour gross profit, but you're only getting 12 hours a week because those VA authorizations are a little shorter, that client is worth $12,480 per year in gross profit. So with those numbers in mind, we can then do a little bit of quick math to determine how many of those clients we would actually need in order to achieve our goal of $250,000 annualized gross profit. So for Medicaid and for private pay, we simply just divide 250,000 by the annual gross profit for those clients to learn that it would be about 24 clients. Either of them would get to that goal. And for VA, it's about 20 clients. But that doesn't take in the full picture, which would include client turnover, because we all know that we do have some client turnover. But with VA and Medicaid, that client turnover is typically much lower than private pay. So the number that we're using here is a 50% private pay turnover. So for Medicaid, it looks like we would need to have 32 clients per year, gain an additional 32 clients per year to meet our goal, which is an average of 3 per month. For private pay, it would be 48 additional clients per year, or 4 per month. And then for VA, it would be 25 clients per year, or an average of 2 clients per month. Something to consider here is you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. And what we often recommend is to have a mixture of these three. So instead of saying, all right, well, I'm going to aim to get 48 private pay clients, we would say, well, why don't you aim for 24 private pay clients and 10 VA clients and 10 Medicaid clients, because that will also get you to that goal. And it makes it a little bit easier for you and your marketer to have a broader strategy as you look at your market. Something else to consider is boiling this down to what that actually means on a weekly basis. So for private pay clients, we're saying you should get an average of 4 per month to reach that goal with our numbers. Well, 4 per month doesn't seem that crazy, but what seems even more attainable is actually just 1 per week. If your goal is to get 1 client per week, that is a much simpler goal to achieve than 4 per month because that timeline's a little shorter. It's a lot easier to measure your success, and we can all get a client per week if we really are pounding that pavement. So that's something that we like to refer to as just the power of one, where you boil everything down to how do I, with inputs of one, achieve my ultimate goals? What's that time frame look like? What does that success look like for me? So we're going to begin with working with Medicaid. So Medicaid and Medicaid waiver is very, very different based on which state you are in. So the overall kind of general process is as follows. With Medicaid, you're actually working with what is referred to as the Medicaid waiver program. So this is a program that allows Medicaid providers to provide care outside of a hospital and in clients' homes. Now, this Medicaid waiver program is administered by each state separately and will have its own fee schedule. The state might be the actual payer for this program, or there might be managed care organizations, think like Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna or Humana. Um, as a provider, you would be responsible for accepting the case manager's authorizations, making sure that your care and your care schedules are within the bounds of the authorization, not going over on your hours. You then are collecting electronic visit verification data. So that's the date and time and location of your services, information on who is giving those services, information on who is receiving those services, as well as specifying which service it is. You have to communicate that to the state using what is called an EVV aggregator, which I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask at the end, and we'll go a little bit in depth there. So you are responsible for communicating that information to the state and then submitting the claims to the different payers. And then from there, the payer pays you directly, and then the electronic visit verification data is what allows them to pay out those claims. Something that's really great with Medicaid, as I mentioned before, is it's very helpful for your caregiver retention. And then lastly, as an underserved payer line, it leads to a higher volume of business. Now, I would be remiss not to mention the recent 80/20 rule that just finalized through CMS, which dictates that 80% of Medicaid reimbursement will have to actually be funneled directly into the caregiver. So we're looking at our margins and saying, well, how do I make a 20% margin make sense for our business? And the answer is this is very in flux right now. It was just finalized through CMS. They have 6 years to roll this out and figure out if it works or not. And something that, so it's not like overnight is very, very different. Providers have multiple years to make this work for you and to figure out how it could work. And states also have multiple years to make it work for them. But just like we saw with the 21st Century Cures Act, which is what mandated electronic visit verification, a lot of states were actually unable to achieve the EVV requirements laid out by the Cures Act. And as long as they put a good faith effort, they actually are able to still continue their Medicaid waiver programs without implementing EVV. I'm expecting a very similar thing to happen with the 80/20 rule because states are going to look at that and say, I will not be able to give any of my Medicaid clients any care because no one's going to be providing care. So this is really an influx new regulation um, that won't affect providers until 4 years at the earliest when states have to have their plans in place, and 6 years when states have to have implemented those plans. So stay tuned because it will be a wild ride with, I'm sure, many, many lawsuits. Another thing that does exist in Medicaid is family caregiving. So this is an opportunity that allows you to essentially hire someone's family member to provide care for them. And how this works is, let's say I am giving care to my aunt who is on Medicaid. It is possible for me to go through an agency, get hired by the agency to be paid a little bit for my work. Usually I will be paid minimum wage by the agency, and then that agency will receive a certain amount of reimbursement by the state or the program for those hours worked in order to make sure that I am staying compliant, to make sure that I'm trained up, and to actually be submitting those claims for me. So as an agency owner, it's a great opportunity where you don't have to find a new caregiver for these clients, and you just provide some of that administrative overhead for those hours worked. And then you get to take that margin as well as help that family member get care and help me make sure that I'm in a financial position to provide that care. Some of the main challenges that come with Medicaid is just like this 80/20 rule, regulations change. Regulations change on a national level as well as on a state by state level. So making sure that you are constantly aware of and in tune with the different regulations is very important. Eligibility verification. With Medicaid comes eligibility. So many people on Medicaid uh, will, let's say they get an inheritance that's too big. They will lose their Medicaid eligibility. Sometimes people lose Medicaid eligibility just because the state Medicaid had an administrative error. Um, Needless to say, it is always important to just make sure that your entire client base is still eligible. And you can usually do that through the state portals. EVV and documentation, so that electronic visit verification data, it is absolutely crucial that you have correct data to prove that the claims that you are submitting happened. And it's important that you keep this data um, on file for 7 years in case of any potential audit. Now, if you're using a scheduling software like a WellSky or an AccessCare, it is doing this automatically for you. And then that it's talking very well to that aggregator. So it's more or less automatic, but it's important to make sure that you are staying on top of it. And then these last three, timely billing, claims, denials and appeals, and administrative burden. When you are working with a third-party payer, you are submitting claims, claims could get denied. You have to deal with the appealing and with those escalations. And just ultimately, there's an amount of administrative burden that comes with working with Medicaid. Moving on to the VA. So the VA, I like to start with these numbers to just understand how big the market is in VA and to understand how many veterans are out there and potentially in need of care. So in the US right now, there's over 18 million living veterans, and 8.4 million of those veterans are over the age of 65. So just a huge number of people who are potentially in need of in-home supportive care. Now, that 8.4 million number seems pretty large until you consider that only about 170,000 of those veterans are actually receiving their homemaker and home health aid benefit, which is the main home care benefit for the VA. So that's a much, much smaller number than 8.4 million, where probably a large number of those people could benefit from home care. So the VA has two main benefits. There's the aid and attendance benefit, and then there's the homemaker and home health aid benefit. So we'll start by going into the aid and attendance pension. So what this is it provides additional monthly income for qualified recipients anywhere from just over $1,400 a month all the way up to just over $2,700 a month. It is a tax-free cash payment to these veterans and their surviving spouses. And the qualification for this benefit is they have to have served during specific wartime periods for at least 90 consecutive days, as well as have health needs and have a monthly income and total asset level below a certain threshold to qualify. What's important to understand about these clients is that even if you aren't enrolled to serve VA clients, you can actually still work with these clients because you treat them as a private pay client in terms of your agency because they are given those cash payments and then they pay out of pocket using that money. The main bread and butter benefit for the VA is the homemaker and home health aid benefit. So this provides personal services such as activities of daily living to veterans so long as they have a care need. So it's anywhere between 6 hours a week all the way up to 24/7 care. Although 24/7 care is incredibly rare, you will almost never see that. Um, and this is the benefit where you actually have to be enrolled with the VA in order to serve these clients. So how do I get enrolled with the VA? There are two third-party administrators for working with the VA, and they act as the payer as well as the credentialing body for the VA. And these would be Optum, who's on the East Coast and much of the Midwest and the Southeast, and then TriWest, which is everything else. So some of the Midwest and then the Southwest and the West Coast. So if you are curious about getting started with the VA, those would be who you would go to, and we can actually have more conversations about that on a one-on-one basis where I'd be happy to explain what's going on in your market and if there's need for you. So once you are enrolled with the benefit through either of these organizations, that's when you can start accepting authorizations for this benefit. And what's really important to consider about this benefit is that veterans have patient choice with which provider they work with using this benefit. So what that means is that, I mentioned earlier that there's 170,000 veterans actually utilizing this benefit out of 8.4 million over the age of 65. Well, what we oftentimes talk about and try to get our providers to do is to find those veterans in their community who are not currently using this benefit and teach them about it. Because what often happens is a veteran might say, oh, I could use some in-home care. And they go and they bump into aid and attendance and they don't qualify because they didn't serve during a war, or maybe they have too much income or assets. And then they say, oh, well, I guess I can't do that. Well, with this benefit, if they get enrolled and get an assessment, they could qualify for some of these hours. So you, as your agency, what your job would be is to help them understand that and help them get enrolled in the benefit, because then once they are, they typically choose you as the agency to work with, and the VA has to respect that. So what we see is providers who are really actively out in their community pounding pavement typically see a 1 to 2 additional veterans per month on their census. Something that I didn't mention before is that the homemaker and home health aid benefit and the aid and attendance pension can actually be stacked on top of each other. So let's say you have a homemaker and home health aid client who's getting 20 hours a week, and you learn that they served during a specific war, they served during the Vietnam War. You can have a conversation with that benefit and help them understand that they might qualify for aid and attendance. If they do, and they get approved for some amount of payment, let's say it's $2,400 a month, well, all of a sudden that original 20-hour a week authorization is now worth for you and your agency 40 hours a week. So just by using these benefits and getting creative, you've made that client A, get the care that they really need, and B, much more valuable for you and your agency. A couple other things to understand is that there is a family caregiving benefit for the VA, and typically has nothing to do with agencies, but it's important to understand. So what this benefit is, the Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, it is basically a stipend for a family member of eligible veterans. And for those veterans to be eligible, they typically need a 70% disability from one disability, or it's 70% disability where 40% of that comes from a single disability. So they could have a couple different disabilities that ultimately add up to 70%. So it allows for a primary caregiver who lives in that house with that veteran, gives them a stipend for their services, gives them health insurance, as well as a couple other benefits, one of which being at least 30 days of respite care per year. So that's where you and your agencies come in, where you can actually be the ones to staff this respite care because someone has to. Additionally, let's say that a client or a veteran's spouse who's giving them care breaks their ankle, rolls their ankle, no longer can take care of that veteran. Now, that 30 days of respite care per year is blown out to as long as is necessary for that veteran to keep receiving their high quality care. So that's where 30 days of respite care can become 180 days of respite care, where you and your agency can provide that service to the veteran, receive those hours, help them in their time of need. A lot of people always ask, well, how do I get my name out in the community? How do I meet these people to staff their respite care hours? Well, in order to provide their family caregiving, they also must provide the program of general caregiver support services to any caregiver working with veterans. So what this is, it's peer support mentoring, it is skills training, it is online programs, additional resources, um, but really importantly is that skills training part of it. So what you and your agency can do is volunteer your time to provide that skills training to the VA, and then you are meeting all these family members who are going to be giving care to their client, to their loved ones. And you're not just meeting them, you're providing them with that training necessary for them to give that care. So when it comes time to take a vacation, or if someone needs help, if you are the one who provided them the training, they will very regularly remember you and then request you, and the VA has to respect that. So how does Paradigm add value? What do we do? So basically, on a high level, is we do everything back office when it comes to VA and Medicaid. So starting with credentialing support, what we do is we help you get enrolled in these benefits as a provider and in these programs. So for VA, we are potentially able to help you get started and create those applications for you. And then in Medicaid, what we do is we do a hand-holding process where we work with you through the Medicaid journey. There's a few more steps than with the VA, but so we go with you along the way to make sure that you're submitting the correct information in the right way. Once you are fully credentialed and are accepting clients, then what we do is we automate your billing. So earlier I mentioned managed care organizations and I mentioned third-party administrators. All this is to say is you have to be submitting these claims to various places and then keeping track of the reimbursements. Well, Paradigm does all of that for you, working within the systems you already have in place to submit those claims in a clean and timely way. Authorization management and client eligibility. With all of these different payers, you are receiving authorizations for how many hours you are able to staff. And what you have to do here is make sure that you are always always scheduling within the bounds of the authorization, as well as making sure that that authorization is always up to date. So what Paradigm is doing is we're keeping tabs on your authorizations, letting you know when an authorization is coming due, and in some cases, even submitting those requests for renewal on your behalf. And then for client eligibility, I mentioned earlier that for Medicaid clients, you have to make sure that they are always still eligible. We run an eligibility check twice a month on the 1st and the 15th. And then lastly, growth support and education. So just like how I went through all these benefits with you today, we have an online platform where we go in depth on what's available to you when you're working with these payers, how to get in front of these clients, where to go in order to grow your census. And then we even offer one-on-one calls to get even more specific, say, do a market research analysis on where you are specifically located, try to find where those veterans are, give you the tools to go out into the community in order to reach those veterans yourself. So I'd like to open it up for any questions, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Jacob. All right, so please feel free to chat any questions that they can be specific, they can be high level. Feel free to start sending in your chats if you have any. For those of you that don't know me, I ran an agency in the Chicago area for about 10 years, and my life changed dramatically when we started working with Paradigm. So not only do I believe in them because I use them and they saved us, they hold your hand. We at one point, the VA owed us an absurd amount of money and they were able to do an audit and get us back a lot of that money that we already paid our caregivers to. So they do more than what Jacob's vouching right now. They were a lifesaver. But I want to know your specific questions, your specific pain points, so we can help your agency. I know one question we get a lot is, can you speak to a little bit about the um the states that are closed, right? And what that means a little bit. And if there's anything the agencies can do, and then there's a bunch of questions coming through that I'll get through.
Yeah, so places that are closed, there's a couple different states on the West Coast where TriWest is not accepting any more providers. So that would be California and Texas at the moment.
Can you
And then
explain why too?
yeah, so it's basically done on a needs assessment. So the VA runs a needs assessment in those states, sees how many providers are providing care, and then how many providers are, how many clients there are looking for care. And so the VA is running these assessments and deciding how many more providers they need. So in Texas and California, where there are many, many, many providers providing care to veterans, the VA says, looks like we are good. Any veteran who needs care is getting care. Now, that is not 100% the case in all places of those states. So in really rural areas, there might not be any providers. So Optum is taking a slightly different approach where they're not closing off states, they close off specific counties. So that would be like a place like Chicago, Illinois is very hard to get into the VA because there's just so many providers already providing those services. But if you go downstate into more rural areas, it's still possible to get into the VA. And so if you are in one of these really saturated markets, there's not much that Paradigm can do to actually get you through. But one way that I have seen work is if you have a specific veteran that you are trying to work with or who you're already working with and is just really dead set on working with you, especially if they've had bad experiences with the other agencies in the market. What you can do is go with that veteran directly to the VA, and that VA might be able to push your application through. And in those cases, Optum and TriWest will typically listen to them and just push it through because they don't want to be on the bad side of the VA at all. But it is important to know that that is not the normal or typical way of getting into these networks. But it is a way that can work. But it's not a guarantee by any means.
Perfect. So somebody wants to know, how do they apply for Medicaid and VA? I know you kind of highlighted at the beginning, but this for anybody who joined late.
hmm So for Medicaid, it's going to vary pretty significantly from state to state. How it typically works is you apply for the state Medicaid program, the big capital M Medicaid program first, and then in that application, there's a way to kind of check off that you would be a waiver provider. Um, some states have you do that and then apply to the waiver separately. Some states, that's the application. It really depends on where you are. If that state is then a managed care state, you then have to contract with the different managed care organizations. So in places like Pennsylvania, where they will just accept you as a Medicaid provider, pretty much no questions asked. Sometimes if you're in Philadelphia or if you're in Pittsburgh, it can actually be tough to get in to the payers markets because those payers are saying, all right, looks like I have enough people who are providing services for these clients, just like what we just talked about with the VA. They don't want to be working with a million providers themselves if they don't have to be. So sometimes it can be hard to get contracted with those payers. So that's just another thing to kind of keep in mind. Now, with the VA, what you would typically need to do is contact TriWest or Optum, depending on where you're located, and then say, hi, I am Jacob with such and such agency. My NPI number is this, and I would like to enroll as a provider to serve Medicaid clients for in-home supportive care. And then they will give you their answer. Another way to do that is Paradigm does this all for you. So in terms of Medicaid, we're not live in all states, but we are live in a good number of states. So if you just shoot me over an email, I could tell you pretty quickly if we can assist. And then for VA, depending on where you are located, if you are in Optum's territories, we would need to know where you are physically located, that county, because
Yeah.
then we can ask Optum, say, is there need in this county? If there is, we'd be able to process your enrollment. If there's not, unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to do much for you.
And at the end, when I send out the recording, I will include Jacob's contact info for everybody as well. A bunch of more questions, so we're gonna try to roll through these. Can the family caregiver apply to Medicaid directly and get the reimbursement by their own for their care and loved one? Or do they have to go through the agency? Then how is that different, direct family caregiver versus family caregiver through agency?
That's a great question. It depends on the state. Some states allow you to go directly to the state, some states do not. So the main difference that we see is a lot of family caregivers, even in places that they can go directly to the state, they oftentimes will just opt to go directly through an agency because then the agency is dealing with the administrative stuff. So, if I'm a family caregiver, I'm giving care to my aunt, and I probably am also working a job. I don't really have time to necessarily keep track of AR for my own hours. That's a huge pain, and I'm probably already providing this care anyways. And so to just go through an agency is way easier. And that's typically what we see. But we do see some family caregivers go directly through the state as well. It does exist.
Okay, perfect. Um, can you please talk about how Medicaid works specifically in Illinois? What are the requirements, reimbursement rates, etc.?
Yeah, so Illinois is changing a little bit right now where they are gaining an EVV system. They were talking to this one called Sandata, and then talks kind of fell through. And so now they have contracted with HHA Exchange as the EVV aggregator. Um, they have said that this will happen sometime in 2024. They have not been very clear or specific as to when in 2024, but so it is coming. So in Illinois, there's a couple different places you have to go. So first, you enroll in the Impact program. That's the state's portal for Medicaid providers. And then you go into the specific waiver program. So that's through the Department of Aging, the Department of Disabilities, and the Department of Rehabilitation. The DOA just really slightly higher rates. So depending on if your caregivers are getting health insurance, it's different. So if they are not, it's about $28 an hour. And if they are, it is $29 an hour and 70 some cents.
Okay. And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then on top of that, it is a managed care state. So you would be submitting claims and getting authorizations from like a Blue Cross Blue Shield or Molina or UHC.
A follow-up to that question, how long does Medicaid application process typically take to set up in Illinois?
In Illinois, they're about 3 months or so behind on processing any applications. So we've been saying to providers somewhere between 3 and 6 months.
All right. And then if you are approved Medicare provider, can you solely focus, or do we, I think we, no, can you solely focus on family caregivers and not accept clients who need services from your caregivers, or is that illegal or frowned upon?
You can absolutely do that. You are not required to work, accept any client that does not make sense for your agency. Um, Now, it is potentially frowned upon by those case managers. You have to manage their expectations. But what we have seen is very typical is a family member will call your agency directly, and it's probably not coming from a case manager. So it's usually like, hey, I heard that I could possibly get paid because I'm already giving care to my aunt. Um, can I do that through you? Is usually what we see.
Okay. We are in Florida, Lake County. We have an RR license. Does VA take our license? We also serve Marion County.
I am not familiar with what an RR license is.
Okay. So if this person could email us privately, and give us a little bit more context, Jacob and I can work together and get you an answer there.
Yes.
And again, I will be emailing everybody out, a recording of this. So you'll have all of our contact info. All right, does it hurt your chances for getting more VA cases if they don't give you a client that only need 1 hour of care and you don't accept it? So if you reject a client
Mhm.
from the VA, will that hurt your chances of getting more cases?
So I always like to say that if you work with one VA, you work with one VA. So how these sorts of things will work is going to change based on your local VA and your specific case manager. So there's no rule that says if they don't accept this client, then we can't send them other clients. That does not happen. There's not an official rule. But what can happen is that if you don't accept those clients and then your competitor does, what will happen is the VA is going to say, well, I'm just going to go to them first because they always accept my clients. So our recommendation is if you can in any way make it work, maybe stack some private pay alongside those hours, figure out a way to make it work. It is always a better idea to take it in terms of that relationship with the VA.
Yeah, it's all about the relationship. And you got to remember too, those 1 hour cases are the ones that typically will grow into more at some point. So I always tell my clients that those are not always the easiest ones to staff, but those do typically convert into more hours down the road. So look at the long-term goals there. Okay, can you help if an agency is approved with Optum and not receiving any referrals?
Yeah, so that would be our education platform, where a lot of times when people get credentialed with the VA, they sign up, they get their shiny new uh, contract letter, and then they wait for those authorizations to come to them. They don't always come, depending on where you're located. So what we find is by going out into the community and helping veterans get enrolled in their benefit, it's a way to kind of drive your own referrals. And then once the VA sees that you are being requested for these referrals and then accepting those referrals, it's a great way to kind of get into the market. But also, we always recommend trying to actively get in front of those case managers as much as you can, because frankly, they probably just don't know you exist because in their life, they just have a list of agencies and they have the ones that they've worked with for 20 years, and they have then the rest of them at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
So it's all about starting and maintaining those relationships as well as helping the veterans that are in the community who are not currently receiving care.
This is coming from one of my favorite people in Southern California. Is there anything that is being presented today currently viable in California with caregivers getting paid $20 to $22 per hour? Can agencies make these alternative work?
So in California specifically, Medicaid is tough because what they are trying to do is make it so that caregivers are going directly to the state. But there is a program called CalAIM, and it's pretty new, and they're kind of transitioning into it. So that's I would recommend looking there.
How much are the MCOs for family caregiving in Texas? And that might be something you have to look into. I don't know if you know that offhand.
Yeah, I don't know the specific number. So the numbers in Texas are quite low, but the family caregiving there is not a different rate. So it's usually I think it's like $14 to $15 an hour or something, and then you pay the caregiver 725. Something to note about MCOs is there is some leeway in terms of negotiating a better rate for yourselves. This is not a hard and fast rule, and it's possible MCOs will not listen to you and say, no, thank you, goodbye. However, in some places where they are really desperate to get more providers, they'll work with you and get you a better rate. I would not be expecting a $30 an hour rate in Texas, though. That would be unheard of.
Way to set expectations. All
Yeah.
right, so we have a few minutes. I'm going to try to get through a few more of these. And again, if we don't get to yours, we will follow up with you after the webinar. Can you talk a little bit about the cycle of actually getting reimbursed by Medicaid? This one's specific in Illinois, but if you know anything outside of Illinois for anyone else, what does that reimbursement cycle kind of look like?
Yeah, so it changes pretty drastically based on your state. Um, Most places require that the MCOs respond to your claims within 30 days. We typically see somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks for being paid for claims, but those MCOs do have that leeway for 30 days. So if you set yourself an expectation of I will get paid 30 days later, if you get paid earlier, great. If you get paid in those 30 days, great. That was your expectation. You set that up for your business. Sometimes they will respond within 30 days, and then you'll get paid like 1 or 2 weeks later. So just to, I would say within 30 to 45 days is when you will absolutely expect to get paid. And it often happens sooner. In some places like Indiana, they are actually requiring that those MCOs pay within 7 days. So it's really fast.
All right, perfect. Do you charge a setup fee for credentialing services? And
We
then
do not.
somebody else specifically, I mean, we might as well just get into both these questions. They'd like to know the cost of Paradigm service. You might as well kind of get into both of those.
Yeah, so there's no setup cost at all. There's no cost for the credentialing services. The only cost that you would ever see from Paradigm is a percentage of your total collected billing, and that is only after you have been paid. So for a more accurate, specific quote, I would love to speak with you directly after this call because I would need to know what's going on in your agency before I can give you a correct quote.
Yeah, and I will tell you it is well worth it. It is a small percentage and less headaches that an agency owner administrator has to deal with. Okay, we're gonna do two more questions. Does Illinois allow family caregiver to go directly to Medicaid?
Does Illinois allow directly to Medicaid? I believe that's an option. I want to double check that before I stamp my seal of approval on it.
Perfect. All right, and this will be our last question, and then we're going to have some closing remarks, but are you familiar with the process of becoming a certified provider for Medicaid in Southern California? And you talked about, is the reimbursement also 30 days? You talked about that a little bit, but the process a little bit for Southern California, if you have that.
Yeah, so I'm a little less familiar with Southern California. Um, so I would need to talk to my team about that one.
And again, after this, email us directly. We'll get you more specifics if there's something. And if Jacob needs to send you to somebody else a Paradigm, he will get you to the right person. A lot of the questions are a lot of duplicates, so I think we answered pretty much everyone's question. If we did
I
not
do
get to,
see one that
oh,
I
go
would
ahead.
like to answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's the nurse register instead of the RR.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
know the VA does not like to work with nurse registries. I've heard of it happening, but I'm actually pretty sure that they're at great risk for an audit. So the VA typically will only work with an actual agency that is employing those caregivers W-2.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I I feel that I mean, when I ran my agency, these are the conversations that we should be having. These are the conversations I wish I was able to have when I was running my agency. I hope for everybody that came today that this was also helpful for you. I will send a survey out as well to get your feedback. If this was helpful, we can do more of these with other experts as well, but also diving more into Paradigm. Again, it's a very small percentage compared to the outcome. So if you have specific questions from me on how I use Paradigm, happy to talk to you. I am their biggest cheerleader and advocate, so I think it's well worth it. If you have specific home care questions and how to run your home care agency and operations, please also reach out to me. I'd love to help you. I can do anything from hourly to year contracts with my clients. And then but I just want to help move this industry forward and help make sure that people have the support they need, which is why I've teamed up with Paradigm. Jacob, any final remarks on Paradigm? I'll give you a little minute to pitch the solution, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, final remarks on Paradigm is just simply, what we want to do for you and help you do is allow you to focus on the revenue generating parts of your business. So we focus on these maintenance parts that make sure you're getting paid so that you are out in the community growing your business, making sure that your hours are absolutely as valuable as possible. So if you're looking to grow and scale up, Paradigm's a fantastic solution to allow you to do that while also working with payers that are typically and historically very challenging to work with.
Perfect. All right, everyone, we're gonna let you get back to work. I will send out a recording, contact info, and a survey if you wouldn't mind completing the survey, just so we can gauge your feedback on this to make these better for you in the future. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your week. Jacob, thank you so much, as always, just such great information, and thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.